It's 10 years since I since I wrote a new book, and it's astonishing how much harder it's become to publish books. You have to do web materials and websites and blogs and vlogs and podcasts, and it's amazing anybody ever actually gets around to reading the book. But we're doing all that stuff, some of which is here, but most of it is on the website, which I'll stick up at the end, which went live today, which is all very good. To clarify what it is not some grand Oxfam plan for the world. It's not even a grand plan for Oxfam. It's a reflection, because what we felt was that there wasn't enough reflection conversation within Oxfam and between Oxfam and its friends and partners, and that this was, could we actually have a discussion and publish it without an enormous argument, was the idea, and I think we managed to do that. People are still trying to work out how we managed to do it, but it seems to have worked so far. And it's an attempt to bring together the different bits of our work. For example, half of Oxfam's work is on emergencies, post-earthquakes, post-floods, what's going on in Burma, and the other half is long-term development work. And those two bits of our work very rarely talk to each other. So it's trying to get all that into some kind of grand narrative on how we see the world going and how those things fit together. Okay, target audience. Now, this was, again, interesting. Normally, Oxfam publications are aimed at people who are in power now. And the sad truth is people who are in power now don't read books. They tend to read executive summaries if you're lucky, or they get someone to summarize it in 2 pages and just read the 2 pages. So this book is aimed at the people who are going to be in power in 15, 20 years' time. So it's trying to think, okay, you come out of university or you get interested in development and you're looking for a narrative about development. What do you read? And at the moment, people read Naomi Klein. They may read Paul Collier. There's various kind of people who have narratives. And when we looked at this, we didn't see an NGO development narrative there. So it's an attempt to fill that little bit of a space and say, okay, here's an Oxfam narrative. Here, what do you think of this? We are, of course, using it to try and get the people who are in power now, the practitioners and the policymakers, to step back a bit and actually think, okay, what does climate change mean for the big picture? What does politics mean for our work as development people? Some of the big questions which actually, I worked in DFID for a year in the Department for International Development of the UK government, and it's amazing how little of that kind of discussion there is about actually what are we trying to do. It's all about delivery on very specific objectives rather than the big picture stuff. Okay, that's enough of that's about the book. Now let's talk about what the book says. Okay, so there's a basic vision here, which is, should be completely commonplace and normal to people who are at this conference, but it's not always when you're in other parts of the development jungle. Which is starting with women and men in communities and the idea that they have capabilities and rights and a voice, and that they are the subjects of development. They're not the objects of development policy, they are the subjects, and development radiates out from their ability to both have rights and enjoy those rights and make use of them. Amartya Sen's idea of capabilities. So what's the problem? 2 girls born in different countries. An awful lot of what's going to happen to them for the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years is purely based on the lottery of birth. Okay, so it's starting with this look at inequality globally and within countries. So whether they're boys or girls has a huge impact on what they can expect, whether they're from an ethnic minority or the majority ethnic group in any given country, where geographically they are. Are they from Sierra Leone or are they from Norway? That's that's the biggest determinant of their life chances completely. But also how much their parents earn. Do their mothers get a secondary education? All those sort of questions which are nothing to do with what that child then does. It's about the lottery of birth, trying to get that sense across. Now, inequality has always been a problem, but it's actually getting significantly worse. These are the good countries. These are countries where inequality has actually improved. I'm not at all convinced by the Zambia one. I think that might just be a random statistic. I am convinced by the Brazil one. If you look at Brazil, even before Lula came to power, Brazil started to grapple with what was the worst level of inequality in the world at one point, and it's now got inequality down to the lowest level in 30 years. So there are cases out there where countries, governments have grappled with inequality with some degree of success. And part of the purpose of the book is to try and learn from those successes. These are the success stories. These are the non-success stories. This is where inequality has got worse within countries. And what you see there is that far more countries have rising inequality within them than have falling inequality. So the world within developing countries is becoming more unequal. And if you take the population of the world as a whole, that is also becoming more unequal. So, I wanted to start with what's going on within countries because I think that's where the real story is, but a few of the kind of big pictures on the global scene. How much would it cost to end poverty? The UNDP did an exercise where they actually looked at how many people live below $1 a day and how much they would need to get above $1 a day, and the calculation was roughly $300 billion a year, which is a third of global spending, or according to Joe Stiglitz, 1/10 of the cost of the Iraq War. So for 1/10 of the cost of the Iraq War every year, you could actually eradicate poverty if you could get the money to those people who need it. So that's a sort of sense of size. Then the gap between the Bill Gateses and the people at the bottom is getting wider. It's roughly now the richest 500 people each have the income of a poor million people. So that's the rough ratio. So you've got this extraordinary figure. 460 million people earn as much as 500 extremely rich people. So if that happened within a country, there'd be a revolution. But at a global scale, it appears to be getting increasingly polarized in this way. And then the thing which actually surprised me was when I actually just went and saw how much does the world produce per person. And I guess I expected it to be about $1,000, $2,000. It's nearly $10,000 per person. The global economy chucks out $10,000 of stuff, goods and services per person. That is 25 times more than people below the poverty line. So there really is enough to go around. It really is a question of distribution and redistribution. If you look at where inequality is most severe, Latin America has historically been the leader in inequality, but it's acquiring some new rivals. China has gone from being an East Asian country to being a Latin American country over the last 20 years in terms of inequality. Southern Africa is right up there with Latin America in terms of degree of inequality. And the red blip is Namibia, which, according to the statistics, is the most unequal. I think it's also probably a data mistake, but it's supposed to be the most unequal in the world. So what you have is a kind of band of inequality across Latin America and Southern Africa, spreading in China. And the place where inequality is least, where the income is distributed most fairly, is Northern Europe. Now, one thing to say about Northern Europe is one of the reasons it's fair is not because people earn in a fair distribution, but because after tax, income is much more fairly distributed. So actually, it's very much what the state does with the social system that makes Northern Europe more equal. Okay, so I'll come back to this later. Okay. So inequality is the big challenge, the big problem. It's getting worse. It's becoming to such an extreme that it's going to become destabilizing. The book also argues that we're entering an age of scarcity, that a lot of things are becoming scarce. Energy, carbon, food, water, land. And in that situation, there's likely to be an increase in distributive conflicts, in fights between haves and have-nots, the haves trying to keep what they have, the have-nots trying to get some of that, and in a situation where the pie is getting smaller, those conflicts traditionally become more acute. So the book is unashamedly asking and saying the answer is redistribution. Now, I don't know about other countries, but in Britain, saying we support redistribution is the quickest way to lose a minister's attention. If you talk about redistribution, it's seen as old politics, it's seen as old left politics, but actually there isn't much choice. We do actually have to begin to grapple with the question of distribution. But the difference with, I think, the way that the book treats this is you don't start with redistribution of assets, of earnings. You've got to start much further back with a much more fundamental question, which is the redistribution of power. And that's what the first section of the book really looks at. This is it's Evo Morales from Bolivia. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But that redistribution of power has got to be the starting point. People have to feel power personally start within, that sense of power within, in order to be able to then come together and have power with other people in their community, and then to start actually engaging in the power people normally think of, which is political life. So we start with the redistribution of power. Redistribution of opportunities is much less controversial, at least superficially. This is schools and hospitals. This is something everybody agrees with, except when you say, what about the opportunity to move home? What about one of the basic ways that my family in the past, I've got ancestors in Scotland, my wife's family have all migrated from windswept, cold, horrible islands on the north of Scotland to slightly less windswept, horrible cities in Scotland. And that migration is one of the best ways out of poverty, and yet migration is one of the things that you really can't talk about in the development debate. It's very difficult. Gordon Brown summoned social democrat leaders from around the world to a big conference a couple of months ago, and people were very good on a number of things, but the debate on migration was basically, migration is getting us voted out. Migration is a real political problem. No one was prepared to say migration is a fantastic opportunity if handled well. It's one of the best ways to get out of poverty. So I think some opportunities are controversial. This isn't all motherhood and apple pie. And talking of controversy, how about redistribution of assets? Now, NGOs, I think, tend to concentrate on things like land reform. There's been a lot of work over the years with the landless movements in many countries, very important. But actually, I think an area that certainly northern NGOs have not worked on nearly enough is taxation. Okay, the basic form of redistribution of assets between poor people and non-poor people is through the tax system. And I think we've really neglected that, and there have been a lot of tax reforms all over the world, many of which have redistributed in the wrong direction. And we thought that it wasn't anything to do with us somehow. So the book argues very strongly that we have to grapple with taxation within countries. How much is on sales taxes? How much is income and wealth taxes? What does that do to the distribution within countries? Yes, we can look at the sort of fashionable international taxation issues like the Tobin tax, but let's start off by looking at taxes within countries, because that's a key aspect of the redistribution of assets. Okay, so you've got inequality rising, redistribution of power, opportunities and assets. Is there a kind of something we've seen in the world which helps that to happen? Now, we very consciously do not have a blueprint. We don't have a magic theory. We don't have something you fill in order to generate profound social transformation. It's not that sort of exercise. But there's two things which the book identifies as absolutely essential to development. Okay, one of them is what it calls active citizens. This woman's name is Geronima, and she's from the Chiquitano Indians in eastern Bolivia. And I spent a few days there and interviewing people and talking, and just sort of spending time there. About 30 years ago, the Chiquitanos were essentially feudal. They lived on large landowners' estates where they were workers. They weren't allowed off the estates until Saturday, when they were allowed to go and play football, because that kept them healthy and effective workers. So they started organising around the margins of the football games. They started talking to Chiquitanos from other farms and started to say, okay, what's it like on your farm? How much are you? What's the food like? What's your housing like? And they started to get a sense of what was going on through the football organisation, and they started to form their own associations. They started to elect local councillors, local mayors, and then certain things happened which became kind of catalysts, turning points for the Chiquitanos. One of them was they went on a march up from pretty close to the jungle, right the way up to the highlands to La Paz, and they made contact with the majority Indian groups in Bolivia, who are Highland Indians, look completely different, wear bowler hats, the women, that very different tradition. And they started to say, oh, we're not peasants like people always told us we were. We're actually Indians, and we've got an indigenous identity, which we'd never actually thought about much before. And so there was a big kind of ethnic awareness raising, also catalyzed by the 500th anniversary of Columbus's something in Latin America in 1992. Discovery, conquest. I think the Spanish government decided to call it an encounter. In the end. And that actually got indigenous movements across Latin America talking to each other about, oh, we've got quite a lot in common, actually. So big sort of trigger there. This process went on across the country, a lot of different protests and processes, culminating in the election in 2006 of, shamefully, South America's first ever indigenous president. It took till 2006 to have an indigenous president in South America. And that was the kind of culmination. Evo Morales lived in the lowland areas, highland background. He sort of pulled it all together. And they actually got, in July 2007, the rights to 1 million hectares of traditional lands. Okay? So from being feudal serfs to owning 1 million hectares of tribal lands in 30 years, almost entirely through self-organisation. So it really was an extraordinary story, and one I never tire of going on about. But this is comfort zone for NGOs. This is what we like talking about. This is citizenship, social movements, empowerment, self-organisation. But if you look at development, you need effective states. Okay, and this is where it starts getting a bit uncomfortable. I'd go further. If you look at development in terms of GDP per capita, in terms of Korea, okay, this child is a child in Korea in 1958. At that point, Korea had half the income per capita of the Sudan. Okay, it now has 12 times the income of Sudan per capita. It's gone from being hunger-stricken, basket case country where people said Korea will never flourish, to being heavily industrialized and a very, very kind of advanced country. And I would say life has got immeasurably better as a result. And the reason it has done that is not because of social movements. Okay? I think if you're thinking GDP per capita, it's effective states who create a stable environment for business, who create a sense of security, political stability. They educate their people. They make sure their people are healthy. The state delivers a huge number of these things, roads, power, the whole business. And if without an effective state, you can have all the social movements you like, you won't get that basic economic development. So this is the bit which I think gets more interesting for us as NGOs, is actually acknowledging the role of the effective states, to which the question then is, okay, what are the implications for an NGO? If you think that an effective state is a crucial target, is it just something we watch from a distance and concentrate on our mobilization work? Or do we think, well, maybe we should actually be involved in state building in some way? So I think that's one of the more interesting areas of conversation at the moment. So to summarize on that issue, I think if you just look at development in terms of GDP per capita, it's effective states and active citizens. But development is clearly much more than GDP per capita. Development is about dignity, rights, all those things that I actually quote the World Bank as the best analysis of what poverty feels like. They did this fantastic thing called Voices of the Poor in 2000, where they interviewed 64,000 poor people in 23 countries and said, what's it like? You know, they actually organised focus groups and one-to-ones and really delved into what being poor felt like for people. And they didn't say, I earn 99 cents a day. If only I could earn $1.01 a day, my life would be different. Not surprisingly, that was not how poor people experienced poverty. They said, I can't look good. I look rubbish. I can't, I'm embarrassed to go out like this. I can't pay the dowry for my daughter. I can't, I'm at the mercy of the local police. They just treat me like dirt. A whole questions of dignity, and then the other one was anxiety, that don't know what tomorrow will bring. What if my husband who's a rickshaw driver, what if he has an accident? How are we going to feed the family if that happens? It's that sense of vulnerability and being at the mercy of events really came across from that study. And it's that idea of dignity and power, which is, I think, means that instead of it being effective states and active citizens, they're on a par. If you understand development in the round like that, then you can see that you need both. Okay, last word with Martin Luther King, whose oratory is unbeatable. And I think the way this links to the book is that all these questions have been with us for an awfully long time. But there's something about climate change which means that it's become ever more urgent. Let me explain a little bit why, and then I'll finish. Development has always been dirty. Okay, my grandmother died in the smog in London about 60 years ago. Countries start off dirty, industrial revolution, dirty factories, and then they get cleaner. That process is no longer possible. If we carry on developing like that, we will have catastrophic climate change during this century. So we have to find a clean path to development very quickly for the whole world. Now, the problem with that is that the only kind of development that's ever worked in the past has been dirty. No country has gone straight to clean development. So it's a huge bet, if you like, apuesta in Spanish. It's saying, we've got to do this. We're not quite sure how to do it, but that's what we're going to try and do. If it fails, carbon will become a luxury, unavailable. Some work by Nicholas Stern at the London School of Economics says we have to move to a global use of carbon of 1 ton per person per year. That's all the atmosphere can withstand. And that's a kind of long-term, end-of-the-century kind of goal. Now, 1 ton per person per year is 1 return flight to New York. Yeah? And that's your entire yearly quota used up. It's 1/20th of what the US is currently using. The US currently uses 20 tons of carbon per person per year. So you've got to get from 20 tons to 1 ton. And to say we can just do that through technology and everybody will be fine is an insanely optimistic prediction, I think. If it doesn't work, then what you will get is a scramble for carbon. And in that situation, the people with the power will get the carbon. And the real fear, I think, is that unless we can get countries in to clean development quickly, there will be something like a carbon curtain falls between the people who are dirty and the people who are clean. There was one, I don't know if people know the films, they don't always, the references aren't always universal, but one writer talked about it being like Star Trek surrounded by Mad Max. You'll get this kind of modern, high-tech world surrounded by people who are living in the wreckage, who don't have access to fuel, don't have access to carbon, and they aren't going to get out of there. So there's a kind of quite apocalyptic sense that climate change poses a huge challenge this century, hence the urgency and hence the bleached bones if we don't get it right. Now, the crucial thing is blogging. Let's get back to serious stuff here. This was supposed to be a conversation. It's been already going on for a couple of years between Oxfam and its partners. We don't want it to stop here. So there'll be a whole pile of stuff up on this website, and we want this conversation to continue. So I hope it doesn't just stop with people sticking a book on their shelves and then not reading it. But it has happened.